and decided to retire and come and live in our community. Fancy that. This lady achieved the rank of Detective Superintendent in a predominant male workforce, and at times her journeys were exciting, dangerous and risky. She's here today to discuss all her life with us today. So I'd like to introduce you to Deb Wallace. Lady Deborah, now, some of you might recognise Deb from, so where do I know the lady from? Well, do you know that she's a presenter on the Millionaire Murderers?
Movie star.
A movie star, and she is in our hall today. So,
You're not on the Masked Singer.
so what we might do is get a couple of hints of her and claim the rewards for anything. We might just put the arm on it later. Right. Anyway, Deb, let's get in it, right? No holds barred, you said? Right, here we go. First question. Where was you born? And where was you born? And why would a young female back in the 80s want to join the police force? Let's hear your version.
Okay. Well, I'm a Westie through and through. Born and bred at Parramatta. I went to Parramatta High, lived at Parramatta, and go for Parramatta. But after Friday night, I may review that. Yeah, I am. You know what? They sent some people out from England to do some training. They wanted to set up some training on resilience for the New South Wales Police Force. And they said, you better go and speak to Deb because we understand she doesn't get stressed. Well, the reality is I never did because I give stress and I don't get it. But they asked me about resilience and they said, how have you survived without getting too stressed? I said, well, I'm resilience. Working class family, which will lead into why I came to join the Cops. I have 4 siblings. I have a brother who's 14 years older than me. He was a plumber at Toongabbie. Any Westies here who would understand those suburbs? Yeah? Well, the reason I'm up here is that I'm really close to him. And he retired as a plumber and moved to Swansea. So I know when I retired years ago, I wasn't near him. But he told me I wasn't allowed to live too close and there had to be a bridge between us that went up. So I'm at Blacksmiths. So that's how I came to be here. I have a sister 12 years older than me, and then I have a brother 12 years younger than me, so a whole generation. And I remember, and you might relate to this as well, when we did sixth form, before it was year 12, and do you remember we did it without the need of psychologist, psychiatrist, medication and the internet, and somehow we got through it. But my dad was a locksmith for Prospect County Council. Remember that Prospect County Council? And he'll make ends meet. He would also drive a taxi one weekend, and also clean a factory. So really high work ethic. So expected the same from his children. So I was, as coming along a long time after my siblings, I was sort of dad's, at the time, favourite. So I sort of thought I had my old man wrapped around my finger. So when I came home from school, I actually wanted to be a travel agent. Still do, really. That's why I run a bit late though. And so I didn't know how to tell Dad when I left school in the October that I wanted to be a travel agent, but training at Granville Tate didn't start in February. So how do I go 3 months without working? So my dad asked me that question that afternoon and said, so, what are you going to do with your life? And I said, well, Dad, it's a big decision and I don't really know yet, but I think if I had 3 months off and thought about it carefully, I'd be in a better position. He said, well, think quick, because I pulled a few strings in my job as a locksmith at Prospect County Council, and I've got you a job as a clerk typist. And you know what they say? It's a government job, it's secure, and you'll be there for life, and you start Monday. So I went along to Prospect County Council. I looked around as a 17-year-old and thought, my old man's a smart bloke, because these people do what they've been here all their lives. So I stayed there for a few years, and then one day in 1982, I opened the newspaper, and there was an ad for the New South Wales Police Force looking for recruits. But in particular, they were looking for women. Now, it wasn't until 1982 they decided to let women in, because women joined in 1915. but they weren't allowed to be front line until 1978, around Fox's era. So I get to reap the rewards of that hard work all those other women did before me to say, you know what, let's let them in. One could say, not you, Fox.
Oh, good.
But that was the worst day of the New South Wales Police Force. Now, they still did say that to me. So that's how I came to be in the cops. And someone said to me, you know, years later, geez, your dad must have been proud, you know, you got to the rank of detective superintendent. I said, Jesus, don't tell him. He still thinks I'm a Prospect County Council. So that's how I came. It wasn't, you know, you hear a lot of people say, oh, I joined the cops because I wanted to make a difference here. No, mine was just I was forced to get out of Prospect County Council.
Righto. What's that?
Yes. Like the Academy Awards. And you get to announce to your class, of which there was 94 guys in my class and 4 girls. That's why I joined the cops. No. A bit like this one. And I got to open the envelope and announce Blacktown, Mount Druitt. You can imagine how delighted I was.
Righto. So, this is, I think, where you meet me.
I met Fox.
I can remember you on your first day. Yes, yeah, I'd never seen women in the job before, and I was quite impressed that they did start bringing women in the job. So, anyway, in you come, right? And then we worked together for quite a while, and then I think you stayed there and I moved on. I was an old senior constable and couldn't handle it. My eyes were starting to shake every time I saw the new girls. I had to sort of move on a different sort of field. Anyway, so you take from there what you did at Blacktown.
Okay, so I remember it was as Fox. So I've just got to say something about Fox, if you don't mind me just saying.
Don't take it.
He's already told us.
Does he still do his poems?
Yeah.
Well, I've just got to tell a couple of stories because Fox would regale us on night work. Because in those days we did 3 shifts, morning, afternoon and night, unlike today with the 12 hours. And you'd see Fox, he'd walk in with his fake cigar. Deborah, let me tell you a story. When I was a lad. So let me tell you, like he was sort of the head of army, according to Fox. Like he ran the show. But I have to say, with all jokes aside, it was pretty daunting, us girls going into a really male-dominated organisation. I say this very proudly when I speak. In fact, I just did a big thing at Legacy for Nikki Wallace, who was retiring as the state president, and I did it at Parliament House. And I'm very proud to say this about the men that I work with, particularly in today's era where we're hearing about the Me Too movement. And I was really disappointed to hear about this thing about Parliament. And if you look through the review they did one on the New South Wales cops, they did one on the federal cops. You know, and if you read the report in its entirety, you know, you realise it's only a very small people have complaints. Well, I have to say, as people look at me, and I was interviewed by this Elizabeth Broderick for the New South Wales review, and they asked me about all, because you know the commissioner said, oh, you should interview Deb, she's been around a long time. She came to me with an agenda, and the first thing she said to me, tell me about your experience in the New South Wales Police Force. And I went straight back, you know how you visualise something, to what it was like when I went to Blacktown in those days. Because they, as Fox said, they weren't really prepared for us women.
We weren't, no.
But I got treated, as did my colleagues, with the most utmost respect. There was no, and she's looked at me like I've had 2 heads. She said to me, that can't be right, that can't be right. What about the sexual harassment, the discrimination? And I said, well, we got treated but absolutely nothing with respect. They didn't really know what to do with us because it was a natural instinct, but when we first came in, to treat us like their wives or their sisters or their daughters, because, so it was a protection, but not once did I, oh, there was once, but he was summarily dealt with by the senior constable. There was one. but
It would cut me grass.
So, you know, I have to commend, because if I hadn't had people like Fox and my partner, Ronnie McGowan, also known as Little Fat Turd, if I hadn't had people like that in my lives in that initial very formative years, in those first 3 years, which is when I was doing that front line, I would never have survived. So I have to take my hat off to Fox, but I do recall this one incident, what it was like for us girls. It was a bit daunting. Fox was the rescue squad operator. We had the rescue squad at Blacktown, so our partners were always going to be in the rescue squad. And there was a place at Blacktown called, near Blacktown called Schofield's. Does anyone remember Schofield? Well, back in those days, it was a really rural setting and there was a lot of fatal accidents always in the middle of the night. And, you know, the rescue squad would get their beeper and they'd turn into like Superman. You'd see them run out of the police car, they'd come running back out of the station, domed in their white overalls, and suddenly they've turned into like, you know, Iron Man. Step aside, you mere mortals, we're here to... So we would go as their partners for the shift out to the rescue, us girls, and we didn't do much except hold a light or get out of the road. But I remember this occasion, my partner was the lead rescue operator, Ronnie McGowan, so I got to go to the fatal accident while he's trying to get the body out. Fox was the second there, and Fox was assisting, but his partner, and Fox's buddy called Linny Brummett. Fox said, Linny, I've got a very important role for you as a woman. See this deserted road up the end here in the middle of winter, in the middle of the night. You've got to stand guard and not let anybody come down that road because of the fatal accident. Linny being, we're brand new, we don't want to question. Yes, senior. So out she pops. 7 hours later, we're back at the station.
Where is she?
Fox says, shit, did anyone pick Linny up? So we race back out there and there's Linny still standing in the middle of Schofields, in the middle of the night, early morning, freezing cold, with dew dripping off her, still standing point duty. And I said, Linny, how the hell? In those days, girls had to wear culottes. You know, they didn't really think a lot about how we might relieve her. I said, how did you go? 7 hours has been a long time. She says, Deb, I didn't want to lose my spot here because if we stuff up one thing, these blokes will have us for toast. So I said, how did you relieve yourself? She said, well, I didn't. But have you got a spare pair of stockings? My shoes are a bit squelchy. So, but it was a brand new world. So I stayed there for 3 years in uniform. And then a changing life experience for me. For those who are from that area, they might remember there was a murder out of Blacktown in 1986, a murder of a nurse called Anita Cobby. Yeah. I was a very young uniform officer at the time, and very inexperienced, but the officer in charge of that case was an iconic figure called Detective Sergeant Graham Rosetta, old school detective, like a detective should look, I guess, tough, spoke out the side of his mouth, always had a schooner and smoked, you know, and his tie undone. And I don't know if you know this, but most murders are committed by people known to the victim, about 90%. And they're the ones that are usually solved or the detectives will know who to lock up. It's the random ones are really hard. He knew after about 2 days Anita Cobby's murder was a random type one and he was running out of leads. The media was starting to disappear. So he was with this dilemma and he's walking out the back of the station to have a smoke and he stopped. And he looked at me and said, Wallace, how old are you? I said, 24, and Anita was 25. How tall are you? I said, 5'8". She's 5'8". That'll do, come with me. And at one moment he decided to do something that had never been done before to keep the media hooked. And that was to do a reenactment of her last few hours on the Sunday. She got kidnapped on the 2nd, killed on the 2nd of February, 1986. So we did a reenactment of her last few hours, dressed me up in clothes similar to what she wore. I did the reenactment from Central on the train out to Blacktown, did the walk they thought she walked, and kept the media with us. So it was a little bit of a gimmick. And after I did the walk that night in the car park at Blacktown, Graham looked at me very seriously and said, Wallace, how would you like to be a detective? And I thought to myself, gee, I must have walked good on that train. Now, he didn't know whether I was ever going to be a detective, but he let me stay with the team. And I felt at the time that was where I could make my career. And that's how I became. And his gimmick worked, because on the Monday following the reenactment, he got an anonymous tip-off, who will never know who, but a shithead who'd been at a party at Doonside said, look, I'm a crook. And I was with a bunch of crooks at a party at Doonside. And about 7 o'clock, these 5 guys left. These are their names. And let me tell you, none of them came back to the party, and I've asked them all why they didn't. And they've all given a different version. If you've got nothing else, turn your attention on them. And so we did. And 3 weeks later, all 5 were arrested for murder and torture.
And you say his nickname was the Fox.
The Fox!
That's not the nickname I ever saw.
No.
I heard they used to call him the gynecologist.
Well, I had several nicknames, but when I used to run into a phone box and get changed in my white overalls, they used to call me the Angel of Mercy because people were laying there, trapped in their cars, life was nearly extinct, and they'd look up and they'd see this big white angel in front of me who would bring them back to life and remove them from the car. Anyway, just an extract from some poem someone wrote about some people used to call him the Angel of Mercy, and he was sent from directly above to patrol the bitumen battlefield in a job he learned to love. Anyway, that's part of it.
There you go.
There we go. So what happened there after Blacktown?
So after Blacktown, I did 3 years as a detective, and I got my official paper that said I was now a detective in 1989. So that's 7 years after I joined the cops. And then a guy who'd been at Blacktown Detectives, I lost track of him. He was a sergeant, but he rang me one day and said to me, "Deb, it's Alan Leake here. I'm a chief inspector now. I've been promoted, and I'm at the best police station in the state. I'm running my own command, and I haven't got detectives. So I want to form a group of detectives. I've got young cops here who are really fantastic, and I want you to come and help train them into detectives. I've got a fantastic detective sergeant. I need you as a senior constable." This is 1990. So he said, "I want you to join us at the best police station in the state." So I said, "I can't wait to go to Tweed Heads." He said, "Well, you're not going to Tweed Heads." I said, "Port Macquarie." He said, "You're not going to Port Macquarie." I said, "Where am I going?" He said, "Cabramatta, of course." So it did begin my journey, which took up a whole slug of my life, because I stayed at Cabramatta for 5 years as a detective, and then there was a whole, as people might remember, Cabramatta was sadly the murder capital of Australia at the time. Everyone was getting murdered each other. No one took a lot of notice because people didn't complain. It's only when the media get involved or politicians get involved that people sort of put the spotlight. No one complained. Also, sadly, we got the reputation as the biggest distribution of heroin at street level in the Southern Hemisphere. So what goes along with drugs is obviously gangs and obviously murders. So that's where, and then in 1995 was a big breakthrough for me as a woman in the New South Wales Police Force, because my boss at the time was quite an eccentric type of person called Paul McKinnon. Paul was old school. He'd been done for 3 drink driving charges, demoted from superintendent all the way back down to senior constable and back up again. So a man, of a legendary status in a way. So he was caught. There was a murder. Remember the political assassination of John Newman in 1994. Just after him, the leader of the street gang running the show also got murdered. So the politicians now suddenly looked, and when the politicians looked, the police hierarchy looked, the media looked. So Paul was called into town to give answers about what was going on in this, this place called Cabramatta, and he asked me to drive him into town because he felt he wasn't coming back. So I drove him in. He went in to meet the commissioner and the premier of the day, then came back out and he said, "Drive me back to Cabra, Deb." And I said, "Oh, everything's okay." He said, "Everything's honky-dory. I'll survive another day." He said, I said, "How'd you manage to do that?" He said, I told him about what the strategy I've got. I said, "What's the strategy?" He said, "I'm about to launch onto the streets of Cabramatta, the Cabramatta Gang Squad. And they're going to take control of the streets of Cabramatta, get rid of the 5T gang and solve the drug problem." I said, "Thank God for that. Because suddenly us 8 detectives get to have a break. We get to smoke cigars like Fox." He said, "What are you raving on about, Wallace? Congratulations. You're now gang squad." So I got a little team of 15 and we set about, and a bit of good luck and good management, a bit of different strategies that we did try. We tried some social strategies as opposed to crime prevention strategies. Being a woman, I was told I could do whatever I wanted because everything I did, they think I was mad and wrong. And finally, after 2 or 3 years it worked. So the place sort of started to turn around through great policing, not through me, just because I had a great team. I had a great boss who gave me opportunity. But more importantly, as a young woman, or now a sergeant, I got street cred, which is what you needed. So that was my Cabramatta sort of chapter.
I think I come across you at Cabramatta there, you did a good job. Now, what happened after Cabramatta?
Well, I went to Cabramatta, and sadly, as often things happen, we were doing okay. Things were starting to look good, good. We got a lot of new laws. And as what often happens, sadly in any organisation, that bit of the perception of the tall poppy syndrome, some really nasty men were jealous that I got this opportunity to run a gang unit. And there was a royal commission operating at the time in the mid-90s about police corruption. And some really nasty people decide to write to the Royal Commission and say that I was the new leader of the street gang 5G and that they were paying me a lot of money. So they surveilled me, followed me, and did a whole lot of nasty stuff to me till finally they actually went to the gang members themselves, the Royal Commission investigators, and asked the gang members how much money they gave me. And their answer was, you think we give Madam money? If we give her money, do you think she'd buy a better car? She got a shit commute. So they saved my ass. And long story short, I was cleared of all that, but it was quite a nasty situation. Paul had gone off to then start, he was given the job of being the head of security for the Olympics. He wanted me to go with him because I can't sort of watch your back, because no one really knows the job I gave you and what things we had in place to protect these allegations. So come with me to, that was 98, come with me to the Olympics. And I said, no, I don't want to, I'm a street cop. If I go to the Olympics, you retire after that, and I've just been a security guard, really. He said, oh no, I'll give you a fancy title. I'll give you a fancy title, I'll call you Director of Operations. I went, no, titles don't mean shit to me. But because some nastiness continued, I got a call, interestingly enough, from Internal Affairs who said, you're so clean, you've got no money, you live with your parents, we want you to run a task force from police corruption. It wasn't where I wanted to be long term. I went and did a short, sharp job of some ex-cops that were green lighting criminals around the cross, and then moved on. And so ended up back at Cabramatta for a couple more years as a chief inspector now, until my life changed again, which is probably where it set my journey for the next just on 20 years. And I got a call from a cranky old assistant commissioner, crankiest man in the organisation, but also the smartest. And he was in charge of this group called State Crime Command, which is where all the specialist areas are. You know, where the homicide squad, the drug squad, and all of those, robbery squad, the sex. Anyway, he rang me. I was out at Cabra and he said, Wallace, you know what these old blokes were in the jobs, they always call me by my last name. Wallace, what are you doing? I said, I'm out here at Cabramatta. He said, aren't you bored out there? I said, well, things have turned around. We've got new laws, we've got a lot of money, the government's given us a lot of things. He said, come and be in my office at 9 o'clock tomorrow, don't be late. See you tomorrow. Hung up. I got told by people, well, don't, you better get there early, this bloke leave you for breakfast. Like, he'd choose superintendents up for breakfast. So I turned up and he said, right, let's go, Wallace. His name was Graham Morgan. He lives at Gosford. Wallace, let's go for a coffee. We go for a coffee. He didn't ask me what I wanted. He said, cappuccino for her, cappuccino for me. Sat me down and said, right, where do you want to be in 5 years? I said, well, my background is local area commands, local police. Maybe I could be maybe in 5 years I might be a superintendent at a local area command. He said, you're joking, aren't you? You're joking, aren't you? You've been doing drugs and gangs for the last 10 years. Why would you do that shit? I said, well, I don't know. What else my answer? And he said, why wouldn't you come and work for me? And I said, because I don't want to work in sex crimes or child abuse. And he looked at me and said, why would you work in those areas? You have no knowledge of that. I said, I know that. But that's where you put the women. They don't put us in the other squads. And of course it was the Margaret Thatcher one. Who doesn't? Who doesn't? And I said, well, your predecessors. Don't judge me by them. Don't judge me by them. He said, with your background, why wouldn't you go to the Asian Organised Crime Squad? And he said, you've got exactly 3 seconds to say yes or it's off, cable's off. 3, 2, done. So I went across to become a chief inspector at the Asian Organised Crime Squad, and from there did another 6 years there as the commander of the Asian Organised Crime Squad, and then went across to become the commander of the Middle Eastern Organised Crime Squad for 8 years, and then finished my tour of duty as the commander of Gang Squad and Strike Force Raptor. So one could say I did Asians, I did Middle Easterns, and I finished up doing bikies. but not literally.
Right, well, that must have been a bit scary working against the bikie there, was it?
You know what, it's interesting, because I don't think I actually did, but there's a media piece that I always get asked about, and there was a media article done, meet the woman who made bikies cry. Now, one would suggest we did as a group, because what we did, we dismantled the bikers in New South Wales through amazing, great policing and using really innovative strategies. In fact, my last year, because when I got there, nothing worse is a commander, and in your roles, a commander getting into a new place and thinking they know everything. So my job is, which is standard, I know nothing. So I got there on my first day and I said to the guys and girls, an amazing group of cops running Raptor, amazing. Tough blokes, you know, like the overall types, but really amazing men. I say all men because they were predominantly were. And I said, look, I know all about Asian crime, and I know pretty well about Middle Easterns, and I know Middle Easterns are now bikies, but I don't know about the bikie culture. Teach me, because the Asians have told me, you can't destroy us unless you understand us. So that I thought was really good. That was the gang members that gave me that advice. So I said, tell me about what a bikie looks like. So we whiteboarded it that morning. We put 24 different things, like, oh, they're now Middle Easterns and they like islanders, they like to extort, they like to sell drugs, they like to kill each other, they like to go down the highway on motorbikes, they like to run tattoo parlours, they like to extort people, they like to sit in mass in their coloured fancy dress outfits called colours. So we wrote it all up on a whiteboard. And I got a bit of a picture about what the bikies look like in 2014. And I said, isn't our job just to destroy all of that? And they said, yeah. In other words, I said, go away for 3 weeks, use your imagination, look up any laws anywhere in the country or overseas, and let's take away everything they like. Everything. So off they went. And they came back with a set of tactical options that completely dismantled bikies in New South Wales, to the point that in 2019, I was invited to go, my last year of service, I was invited to go across to America to an international conference for all investigators of bikies across the world, thinking, and they wanted to hear about what we were doing here in New South Wales, but more importantly, what we didn't know, that Raptor, not me, Raptor, got the World Award of Excellence for policing outlaw motorcycle gangs. So today, we set the standard. So amazing journey, but I tell you one thing, there was a guy from the Nomads called Moody Tajua. The Nomads were a group from Western Sydney, mainly from Maryland, Guildford, all Middle Easterns, and the Tajuas were the Ibrahim's cousins, but not, you know, not a brain cell between them. And he was, you know, and they know how they used to model the original bikies, not outlaw motorcycle gangs, were as a part of, I don't know if you know this, but they were originally started about 1947, and it was about, and all because of military. A lot of the expats needed a bonding, and they needed a common interest, and they were used to a structure. So they formed bike clubs, not bikies, bike clubs. And the movement was largely in America. And there was a big festival of bike enthusiasts. Lots of ex-vets went to this festival. And at the festival, there was about 5,000 veterans there. At this festival, a couple of groups had a disagreement, and as we know, the gun culture in America, they pulled out their guns and they shot each other. There was heaps of outcry in the media about, oh my God, the lawlessness. And the guy who organised it got up and said, no, we're a brotherhood. We're bonded together for a common interest and united. That group do not represent us. They're the 1% who did operate outside the law. And that's how the catch cry of outlaw motorcycle gangs come. And that's why on their colours, they all wear a 1% patch. So that's how so it was a military thing. But this idiot, Moody Tajua, his role was Sergeant of Arms. And he was such a goon, he had on his face, public enemy, hello. So we were targeting the Nomads pretty hard because they'd gone into a nightclub at Parramatta, as they do, what a bunch of cowards, without their colours, because they weren't allowed to wear colours in licensed premises. And they stabbed this innocent bloke. He's there with his girlfriend, mind his own, but just because they could, they stabbed him, spliced his spleen and cut out his liver. Critical, not likely to survive, but he did. So we had a model. My head of Raptor, head of the tactical team in Raptor, his view was, Deb, if one of them catches a cold, they all get the flu. So we were destroying their clubhouses, which is very nice. They got a bit shitty. So this Raptor came to me and said, boss, Moody's put something on Instagram about you. And I said, oh, what's Instagram? He said, oh, you're such a dinosaur, it's little videos. I said, oh, what's he say? Oh, we don't want to tell you. I said, why, is it a threat? No, we better show you. First one, Deborah Wallace. I think you're in love with me. Second one, Deb Wallace. I think you're obsessed with me. And I've never met you. But I think we should go on a date and get to know each other better. But before we do, if you look anything like those police women I see walking around Marylands in their cargo pants, you need to lose 5 kilos of your big fat ass. I said, get in, boys. So they went out, and as you would do, they were ripping off finance companies to get Harleys and Lamborghinis, so we were taking them all off them, and he got the shits. After a month, the boys come back to me for a and said, boss, he's put another one up. I said, oh, now what? No, boss, we'll play this for you. Deb Wallace. I sincerely apologise for being disrespectful to you and your ass. Can you now tell Raptor to fuck off? so we had some interesting time.
Oh, that's a great. Now listen, have you ever been involved with the military during your police service?
I have, and it was probably in one of the worst times in my career. And they not saved me, but saved my 8 staff. And it was a case, just to cut long story short, in 2010 I was at Middle Eastern Organised Crime, and I had a group of a middle level that did all the drug jobs, generally all the search warrants. They were a mixture of training detectives and seasoned detectives. They were sort of a middle level, not the high level organised crime and not my uniform. And what would happen, stock standard information comes in during the day, you know, we're going to do a search warrant in the morning. On this particular day, it was the 10th of September, 2010. And they came to me and said, Deb, a bit of an unusual situation. We've got an informant in the field. He's with an Asian. We don't know his name, but they call him Mr. Miyagi. He's in his mid-40s. We don't know much about him. We've checked all what we can. No history on his unit, no history on his car, no history on his wife. But he's a broker. What happens is the 2 Middle Eastern groups can't meet together because they kill each other. But one will drop the money off, one will drop the drugs, he'll exchange it, and everyone's happy. And they said so at about 9 o'clock tonight, he'll have this drugs and he'll have the money all together. He'll have about 4 kilos of coke and he'll have the money as well. Can we do the warrant? Oh, we normally don't do warrants at night, a bit more risky, but they said, boss, we've got an informant right there, he's with the Asian. He's going to give us up-to-date information all the way, boss. So we did a risk assessment as we had to do all the paperwork and all the approvals, and I said, yeah, I agree. I think it's a viable operation. So off we go, and a young guy called Bill Cruz, he was 3 years in the job, but a real gun, and had to go all the way. An amazing young fella. He wanted to lead this job, so we said, yep, you can be the case officer with one of the best detective sergeants I've ever had. Policeman's policeman, built like Scotty, like a Sherman tank. A policeman's policeman. He'd been shot at by bikies in his career, but he was cautious and he was so good. I said, he'll be with you. He's in charge, but you're the case officer. So off they go. They arrive at the units. The informant there says, he's asked the question 2 minutes before entry, are the drugs there? Yep, drugs are there. Any guns? Oh no, Mr. Miyagi's in his 40s. He's just an Asian little bloke. He's got no guns. So we entered. What they didn't know was that Mr. Miyagi, the Asian, had been smoking heroin, so he was paranoid, and he'd allegedly been ripped off by some Middle Easterns the night before, so he had a gun. So it got hidden in a garage. So as the police approached, they've done, as we have to do, they were going to go to the garage where the drugs were going to be held. Half the team went to the unit to secure that. Young Cruzy and his sergeant came around, went, oh shit, there's a garage door open there. Don't know why that's open, but we better tell those people to stay in there because we're here. So they mount around the corner in an underground car park, say, hello, police, search. That's all they got out before the Asian came out, fired straight at Cruzy. Hit Cruzy in his shoulder. He dropped his battering ram, but got his gun from his wrong hand, tried to return fire. The sergeant returned fire as well. And to this day, we'll never know whether one of two things we think happened. Cruzy looking for cover because he's been shot, has possibly just slightly turned looking for cover, but the bullet from the sergeant has gone into his neck and cut his spinal cord. Or the other thing is the sergeant hearing the troops arriving to give assistance, aiming at the Asian, made a slightly deflected. He does recall going, stay back! And whether he's slightly deflected, it doesn't really matter at the end of the day. So I'm faced with a double whammy. I lose a colleague, but also it's likely friendly fire. No ballistics at that stage. So we have to do what you have to do in those cases. Everyone's isolated. They have to go. It's pretty horrific what cops have to go through in those sort of what we call critical incidents. They're treated like criminals in a way. It's quite sad. We do our best not to, but there's a process that the community expects. So I get there and at Bankstown, it was at Bankstown, and that sergeant says to me, "I've killed him, Deb. I know I have." I said, "Just don't predispose anything, Robbo." His name was Dave Roberts. It has to play out, Robbo. He said, "I know I've done it. I know I've killed him, Deb." I said, "Come on, let's just you have to do some certain protocols. We'll worry about that when we hear the ballistics." So they did the protocol, but that morning, so we did all the stuff you have to do, and it was about 5 a.m. That team had now all gone home, but the oncoming shifts were all coming in, all the staff. There was a lot of speculation what happened. We couldn't comment, obviously, because it was part of an investigation. But I didn't know now at this point, what do I do with a police shooting but friendly fire? Who would know better than anybody? The military. So I rang a good friend of mine, a lieutenant colonel out of Holsworthy, who was running the SAS out there. And I said to him, "What do I do? What do I do to this team?" And he said, "Deb, I'll quickly give you some advice because you haven't got time to spare. I'll give you just what we do. When we were in Somalia, in our theatre of war there, we would immediately wrap the whole platoon in cotton wool until the inquiries were done. We'd sort of treat them like victims and say, 'Oh, you must be feeling this and you must be feeling that.' We sort of changed strategy because we lost a lot of they never came back. So we changed the strategy with Iraq and Afghanistan, and we tended to say, 'You have control. What do you need?' We gave it back to them. What do you need? Do you need time off? Do you need a support? Do you need to get back to work? Do you need a chaplain? What do you need?" And we gave that control back to them, and we didn't. We got them all back. Even Dave Roberts, who suffered terribly, we got him back. But we were realised in a way he was never in post-traumatic stress. We think he was in traumatic stress because he never really dealt with it until the coroner's findings came out and attributed some blame to the risk assessment on all of us. It wasn't Robbo. And at that point he fell apart. And it was 5 years later, so we actually got him into the St John of God at Richmond, but for veterans. We got him into the veteran program because he could relate more to their feelings than he could to policing stress. And we got him pretty good. Every so often had a bit of a time we needed to go back and get some, like I said to him, "It's not a problem. If you got a broken arm, you get a bit of a pain, you've got to go back and get some more Panadol." And he was pretty good, but you know what? Isn't it funny? I think stress. About 5 years after that, and he's only now a man of 49, he got non-Hodgkin's lymphoma stage 4, and he was dead in 2 months. But I remember I was with him on his last days, and a few hours before he met a lovely lady. He was divorced, his marriage suffered, but he recently took with a lovely lady, and he said to me, when he only had a few hours to go, "Deb, I want you to tell Deanne that I died a man in love, and you can't ask for more than that." So lovely in a way, footnote, but it was the military that had been, and then I did a lot of work with the military on their return to country for their Afghanistan people coming back. I worked with a lot on them about what they may be faced with, like how people will prey on their skills. Bikies will look for people with explosive skills or people that are good with guns. So just be mindful of that. So it was an absolute pleasure to deal with the military in my time there with the Raptor in the Middle East.
But how are we on for time there? Are we ready for time? Right, we might wrap this up because we can go on forever. It's very interesting. Anyway, Deb, thank you very much for coming to see us today and give us a bit of talk about your life. What an exciting
Well,
life.
if anyone in retirement, what does a cop do? If anyone wants Meals on Wheels, I'm the cook at Swansea Meals on Wheels. I don't cook. I peel potatoes. No, I should have been going. I felt like I'm a pile when I get there. I have to peel potatoes again. And if anyone wants a nice quiet drink, you'll always find me Friday and Saturday nights at the front of house at Swansea Rawson's Bistro and Cocktail Bar. I've got on the board of the Workers Club. So I do front of house just as a bit of keep me out of trouble on Friday, Saturday nights.
Oh, very good. All right, let's put our hands together and go out.
No, I won't. I'm not taking an old lady shopping.
All right,
No.